Hello and welcome to the Alastair Generationally Speaking podcast, where we look at bridging the generation gap by debunking myths, tackling stereotypes, and sharing practical tips on how we can build stronger intergenerational connections. Joining me today is, I'm not sure if she's my first millennial that I've interviewed yet, but certainly one of only a few. And millennials are at such a critical time of their life stages that it's a particularly interesting topic to talk about. And the person I'm talking about today is very much a millennial. She has been at IBM, a global technology company, for most of her working life. With 10 years both in London and in New York. She's passionate about the retail industry and she's been leading teams of all different shapes and sizes throughout her career. So Kristine Long, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me. And what an honour to be your first millennial.
Well, you know what? It's the millennials are wondering if they're becoming a bit of a sandwiched generation, really, because everyone's talking about Gen Zs coming into the workplace. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got Gen X's and boomers leaving the workplace. And literally, you are there right in the middle, but you're reaching some very important life stages. And we should say that your baby Jack is one of the very first beta babies.
Yeah, February 25. So yeah, right at the beginning of that new generation. Crazy.
And of course, it's very arbitrary. This whole thing of all of a sudden, we went from alpha to beta and literally at the stroke of midnight 2024, a whole new set of traits were going to come across. Clearly not. But let's start at the very beginning. Let's go back. You are a millennial. Do you see yourself as a millennial? Do you think you're typical millennial? I'll just let our audience know, if they don't know, that millennials were born between 1981 and 1996. So where do you fit in terms of not the stereotype, but the accepted view of a millennial?
Well, I'm slap bang in the middle of those millennial dates. And I would say I was a typical millennial. I think especially when I think about it from a work perspective and I think about how I am in the workplace, and what what I value and what drives me, I think I would definitely be a typical millennial in that regard. But I think, and I know it's something that we'll probably talk about, is around the milestones, probably slightly different on whether my milestones or big things in life have been the same as my other peers or whether they're more similar to different generations. But in terms of being sort of value-driven, prioritising a good work-life balance and things like that, then I would say I was quite a typical millennial. And also being quite vocal as well. I think, being vocal in the workplace, especially when there's anything that's, you see that you want to speak up about, and supporting others in sort of sharing their voice as well. I think that's a really good millennial trait that has gone, that is strengthening through the more junior generations. So yeah, I would say I was quite typical in that regard.
And in fact, before I want to come back to your upbringing and what shaped you as a person, but you touched on something there, and I'm going to mention it now before I forget it, is that I think we've spoken in the past where you felt that as millennials, you found your voice, but it took a while for you to find your voice when you're in the workplace, where Gen Z are coming into the workplace and they have their voice straight away from the get-go.
Yeah, definitely. I think with, definitely as a graduate and coming through, I think you really, as a millennial anyway, or as I was as a employee, you definitely feel like you need to kind of earn your right and earn sort of, through working really hard and then be able to have a voice and know that you've kind of earned your way along that to be able to kind of speak out and stuff. And I think, Gen Z, in a great way, actually come in really confidently and are very much more black and white in that sense, which I think is a great shift to speed up how companies are structured and how they communicate with everybody across the board. But yeah, I think you have to, certainly I felt like I had to really prove my worth in order to then have a voice and be able to kind of speak confidently, which is probably, as I got into a more senior position, the last few years, then, I feel like I have that credibility behind me to be more confident as a leader, knowing that I've kind of felt I've, really knuckled down and been able to do that.
And we'll come back to that again, because millennials are now, the majority of management are in the millennial age group. And therefore, again, I talked about that sandwiched in many respects, and Gen X were often seen as sandwiched, but I think they're easing out the other side.
I think millennials are the new bridge, or, potentially the new bridge. Yeah, definitely.
And you're also that whole thing where you're caught between where you're having to respond to Gen X above you, but also then you're managing Gen Z below you. But let's hold that fire for 1 second. Let's get back to, your upbringing and what shaped you as a millennial, and whether or not that was a fairly typical millennial upbringing, and what do you think shaped you growing up to make Kristine Long who she is today?
I think the main thing, and hopefully my mum won't mind me saying too much, but obviously as you grow up in my dad was in the Air Force, so moved around all the time. Mum then wasn't the person who could build, a big career, because every 2 or 3 years she'd have to start and change and start something new. And I think that was really interesting to witness as a child, sort of growing up and seeing that. And I think as it was that sort of perfect moment where, women are becoming much more profound and, leaders and stuff in the workplace, as I grew up as a millennial, that meant that I was like, okay, that's what I really will prioritize, is that kind of independence, the longevity of a stable career, and then obviously the financial stability and everything that comes with that as well. I think that was a big part of what motivated me to become very focused on having this really strong career path. So I think that was a massive shape. And then I think just generally outside of work, just having very strong female family members, who are, I sort of, alpha women and, very strong and, very inspiring. And then also the same amongst my friends. We're all successful women who are managing families and things like that. And they're inspiring as well. So I think a lot of those things where, you've got a close group of friends who are sort of in similar situations, and you're able to kind of grow and strengthen with that sort of really nice sort of support and community around you as well, that makes you feel like, okay, I can do this and I can do that. And actually the generation prior, where the women were more at home and weren't either the breadwinner or having sort of these huge careers, actually we can be the generation where it flips slightly and it becomes the norm to have a career as equal as your male counterpart.
Let's talk a little bit about the comparison of upbringing. So the upbringing that you had versus the upbringing that you're giving Jack. Clearly, they're going to be very different. Your circumstances are very different, but also there's an attitudinal difference as well. And let's be honest, no generation has ever approved of the way that their offspring bring up the next generation. That's been the same through history. But what sort of comparisons do you draw between your upbringing and what you're going to be doing with Jack as he grows up?
I definitely think it's like, Jack will grow up with his dad around day to day there, doing as much as me in the home, at home. And I think because my dad was, well, as I said, in the RAF for, until I was sort of early teens, and then was, working very long hours and commuting, 2 hours there, 2 hours back, so you never really see him when you come, home at 8 p.m. when you're in bed or whatever. So I think that will be a big difference where, we want to make sure that he sees both of us as he grows up, just as, as equal and as balanced. But I was thinking quite recently is like, if there was ever a time, I think because millennials can be, and same with Gen Z, can be quite great at taking risks and maybe doing something a little bit out of the norm, or, setting up a business or doing freelance or, something like that. Like how say, in, I don't know, 10 years time, Max and I are doing something different where we're out of the corporate world and we're doing something completely different. What will that be like for Jack? Because my dad was, post RAF, he was in the corporate world, and that's probably why I'm in the corporate world. So what will happen when Jack's 15, 16, 17, sort of thinking about whether he would want to go to university or not, or what he would like to do? How much will he be influenced by, at that time, what Max and I are doing? And I don't know what that will be like. So yeah, I think that'll be quite interesting to see whether the new generations who are so young now would follow the career paths of their parents as much as I think millennials kind of have. But maybe that's just me and my friends.
How influential do you think parents are in shaping a child's future?
Really influential. I think really influential. I think, yeah, I mean, obviously I can only speak from my own experiences, but mum and dad were very supportive but also not strict, but very like, if you don't know what you want to do, just make sure you get an education and you make sure you do this, and we'll support where we can as well. So there's things like that. And it was just a given to go off to university, but that's not everybody's path at all, and it shouldn't be. But in our household, it was like, yeah, you'll go to university, and and you'll get a sort of, yeah, quite a corporate career, I guess. So I think that definitely shaped me. Yeah, I think parents are very much like that, And I'd say I watched my mum with Jack, and I think, I learn a lot from her as a mum, and sort of doing what gives her is instinct for her, and how she is definitely shapes how I am as a mum, for sure. So for both work perspective and then also at home, I think, yeah, it's so influential into how you are and how you empathise and what you're like amongst people and things, and then also how you have your work focus and what you what you're motivated by.
Let's talk about millennials and milestones, because it's a big topic. People talk about there's different traits that are associated with different generations, and one of them is, for millennials, is this milestone issue, and that they are later milestones. However, there's a difference of view of why they're later milestones. So what I'd love you to do is to delve into, first of all, for you, why you think it's a slightly later milestone. Because let's be honest, if you were having a child at your age 30 years ago, you would be a complete outlier, where now you're far from being the outlier. And then look around your other friends and other people with your generation, why they are having delayed milestones. Is it the same reason to you, or is it different?
Yeah, and I find it crazy that, as a 35-year-old mother, I was technically a geriatric mother according to the NHS. And that for me, that's mad, because all my friends are all sort of having babies at the same time. And I think it's because we prioritized careers, and I think it's just prioritizing careers because we can, and we progress in the workplace, and IBM are a great support of my career path, and they as being a leader or wanting to achieve X, Y, and Z, you kind of think, oh, I can do all of these things, and I'm getting the support to do these things. Or moving to New York, for example, at 25, I could do that because I was supported by my company to give me a role out there. And, all these things are great. And I think because of you've got that almost the structure around to be able to do what you want to do. So it felt like you sort of, you have more of that confidence to be able to put yourself first before then starting a family. But then I also think we're all like, well, we need that sort of stability, the financial stability, owning a home or renting a home that's a nice environment to bring a child up in, and things like that. Whereas, I think sort of, 20 years ago, say, or 30 years ago, it might have just been more, that takes priority as opposed to your surroundings, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think it's an interesting one. And again, it'll be interesting to see how it changes through the generations. Whether it maybe goes back, I don't know. Swings a different way.
And I think the big debate here is how much is the delayed milestone a choice and how much is it because of circumstance? So on one hand, you've got people saying, a bit like you, it's a bit of a choice thing. I've waited my career and I wanted things to be in a certain position where I felt comfortable having a family. Then there's the other side that says, well, actually, we couldn't possibly have children yet because houses are too expensive. There's this is in the way, that's in the way, and therefore, actually, it's more circumstances have driven our decision to have these later milestones. Where do you sit on that equation?
Well, I think I didn't meet my partner until a lot later than all of my friends met their partners. They all met probably in their 20s, and they then experienced life together, and they would have probably made more of a decision to delay having children until they were further along in their careers, until they because it is expensive and all of those things in place. And then my partner and I met, and it was very much, well, because we've independently been working hard and building our careers and stuff, actually it naturally got to a point where we're like, okay, we can, we're now ready to have a baby, and we're very lucky that could happen, and that we're in a position to be able to do that. So I think definitely, moving to New York, for example, and then coming back and then having a goal of something else, that I think all those things are there because all those things happened, and then it just meant that sort of meeting someone just was later down the line. And I think also it depends on your childhood as well. I think a lot of my peers, you have parents who, might have broken families, your parents are divorced, and that sort of shifts what you're then looking for slightly and what you're waiting for or not waiting for when you meet somebody. So it's all, there's that, I'd say I was sort of very 50-50 in the circumstances, and then actual sort of the decision making of it. And more the decision making was probably more at the earlier stages, and then kind of when I'm like, okay, I've now got to a point in my career where I'm sort of happy. Where's the person I'm now going to share life with, and so yeah, that felt for me much later in life than everybody else. But then obviously, us then having a baby was probably much quicker than when my friends met their partners in their 20s. So it's all it all kind of ebbs and flows, I think, along the way.
Yeah, and of course there isn't a set pattern or a set formula that people follow. It's always interesting to hear people's perspectives. I want to come into the big area that this podcast has created a lot of interest from people interested in dealing with different generations in the workplace. Mm-hmm. There are currently 4 generations in the workplace. There aren't really 5. Those who say it's 5, yeah, there aren't that many 80-year-olds in the workplace anymore. Yes, 1 or 2, but not a significant amount. So it's really 4. And you are very much there in the middle of all of that as a millennial. How do you see, from when you entered the workplace to where you are now, how different is the environment?
It's quite different, where there's much more balance across, you have much younger people in leadership roles, which is amazing. And you have a lot more females in leadership roles, and there's a lot more, there's a lot more gender balance than 13 years ago, when I first sort of started my career. So that's definitely really different. I would say, as a management consultant, we've always been very good at working remotely, because obviously you work, wherever your client is, and then you go in the office or your home. So it's always had like a very good, a good blend. But I'd say the biggest shift is how the generations react post-pandemic. And I think that has been the biggest eye-opener, because obviously millennials who may have purchased a home and they're in their home and they're ready to buy a dog, and the life is very much set up to be flexible working, remote working, and or going into the office 3 days a week and coming back, like that set up a lot more to have or to have made sort of big life choices, like getting a dog or having a baby or moving outside of London. And then I think the younger generations are coming in now, and quite rightly, they want to be around people in the office to learn from and to be inspired by and to connect with and have a community. So there's a bit of a funny one where I think millennials, and this isn't, it's not anything from specifically with my workplace, but from what I see broadly, is that it feels like there's more millennials who would probably be, take advantage of the opportunities of working from home and then working in the office and having that flexibility. Whereas I think the Gen X and Gen Z are much more like in the office world, Gen X because that's what they're used to, that it's always been that way. And Gen Z because they're entering the workforce and they want to be around people, quite rightly. So it's a funny one. And I think it's, you have to really be like, no, get into the office and be around people, because that is what it used to be like. And it's really interesting. I'd say the pandemic shifted things more so than anything else, I would say, from a personal perspective in how the workforce changes. Because, I work at a technology company, so technology has always been very absorbed, and we've always kind of been ahead of the game and know what's coming and, adapted to, accordingly. So for me, it was less about the technology, and it's more about, the community and how there's that need for community and how people are sort of physically present or virtually present.
How much do you think that was a natural evolution versus it was the pandemic? I mean, some people see the pandemic as an accelerator, others see it as an initiator of that cultural change of flexibility, demands, and so on. Where do you sit with that?
I think it depends. It would be a good question to ask in maybe 10 years' time, when we're a little bit further away from the pandemic, because I think it definitely sped up a lot of different things. It sped up the adoption of, virtual meetings and things like that more broadly. But did it speed up flexible working? Or are we gonna, not flexible working so much, I mean, like, sort of splitting your time between home and office? Or will we go back to that in the next few years, which a lot of companies are starting to kind of prioritize as well, where, you become more office-based again? And how does that then change how people had made big life choices during the pandemic, where, leaving London but your office is in London or things like that? So I think it'll be really interesting to reflect on that slightly further away, but I definitely think it obviously accelerated a lot of things, initiated that more broad acceptance of home-based working as well as going into the office.
Seeing yourself now in a management role and look back at the Gen Xers and the Boomers who are managing you, how has that style changed, and what have you had to become, if you like, how have you had to be different than the people who are managing you?
I think being managed, it feels more structured and a bit more sort of formal. And I don't know whether that's from a generational thing or more sort of the hierarchy of how things kind of go with, your different sort of targets and things that you're sort of measured by as you sort of go up the chain. But it feels a little bit more like, in more infrequent but more formal when I have conversations with my manager and the sort of the tick boxing that has to happen throughout the year and stuff. And I think for me, the people I manage, I'm much more informal, I would say. I think I'm much more of an informal manager. I think I am happy to pick up the phone anytime. I can, I'll receive Slack messages, and it's all a little bit more informal and sort of chatty and more frequent. which I really like, and I like that side of it, because I think you can you have a bit more of a you can build nice relationships without the formality of it slightly. So
But
yeah, I think.
Does that blur that relationship slightly, where you're almost friends with the teams you're working with, and therefore does it then become a bit of a challenge if there is a performance review where some action's required?
Because I think when there is a challenge and there's actions required and stuff, you really understand how to communicate that with that person, and you can really, what they're going through, or how they feel, or the whole picture a little bit more, I think, and you can adapt and make sure that you kind of guide them along the way in a way that really suits them, because you know them a little bit more, and there's more there's probably more ways of communicating with them, whether it's in the office, on a conference call, or Slack, or a WhatsApp, or something like that. So it's a little, just going out for a coffee. Like, there's lots of those little sort of more nuances. But obviously, I think there's always, in a really big corporation, there's always going to be that structure that's there. And I think everybody knows that, your manager or your manager's managers are the ones that have to follow a process. And, the company I work for is very process driven, because it's huge. It has to be. So I think that always is there. There's no kind of, you can't just do something, that's not following a process, if you see what I mean. So I don't think, I think it's a nice balance. I think it works well. Yeah.
So looking back, because I'm suddenly realising we could be chatting for ages yet, but so I really want to wrap up with three things. The first one is, you as a millennial manager, team leader, whatever phrase you like to use, what advice have you got for Gen Zs coming into the workplace, graduates who would then end up working with you, that would make their lives easier, and they would probably maybe achieve more, be more successful, and certainly they would connect better with millennials like you?
I think just always having a point of view. I think, millennials and the youngers, as we said earlier, have a voice, and that's great. I think everybody has to have a voice. Back that up with things, have a point of view, know the statistics of something. If you're wanting to do something in the workplace and sort of, challenge the status quo, and you want to do something that you're super passionate about, and you've got a great idea, back that up with a little mini business case, or the facts that sort of support it and things. So I think any view, making sure that you've got a great point of view, and you've got sort of things to back it up, so that you can be really confident in seeing that through. I'll say that was a big that's a big thing that I say to a lot of people that I manage and lead, is making sure they have a point of view, and they can back it up, and be confident with it. But having a point of view is so key, is in a workforce where there's thousands of people.
Mm-hmm. And what about Gen Xers and Boomers that you work with, that you report to? How would they get more effective communication with you? What should they do to create a better intergenerational connection?
I think it feels, from a communication perspective, millennials, or certainly peers for me, and then the Gen X and baby boomers, I think, because you've had that time together of communicating the same way in the workforce, you're probably a little bit closer in it. So I think it would be more about, how would a baby boomer or a Gen X employee communicate best with Gen Z, and that's probably more like bringing that flexibility, a little bit of more that informality. But for me personally, it probably is a little bit more of that, just having it being a little bit more informal, and making sure that decisions made include the people that the decisions are going to impact. And I think that is so key in any business, making sure that opinions throughout all the generations are all thoughtfully considered. because everybody gets impacted. So I think just bringing people's opinions through and listening to that as decisions are being made is really, really key.
And finally, you're clearly very successful in your role. You've achieved a lot. You've risen through the ranks at IBM. What advice do you have for your fellow millennials, or millennials who maybe are hoping for a bit more than they have at the moment?
Just be very pushy. I think that is it to an extent. I think just we all have to be a bit selfish and it's a similar advice to what I was saying to Gen Zs. If you have ideas, just really share ideas and be pushy in what you want. And I always say to people, you are the person that can create the company you work for in the future. So I want to be making sure that I'm working for a company that I want to be working for again in 10 years' time. And it's the same with people where it's like you can be part of continually evolving a business that you want to be part of and shaping it. So I think just that for sure. But then there's loads of millennials that are way better than me, and I probably need to take a lot of advice from as well.
It's mutual advice from everyone. And actually, one of the things that it's interesting you were saying there, being a bit pushy, because one of the things that people always said about millennials is that they were the big collaborators, and they weren't necessarily the leaders of the future. They weren't as happy as maybe the generation before them to put their head above the parapet and take those risks, because they were collaborators. Do you think that maybe they have just changed as they've gone through stages of life, so they've got a newfound confidence and they're becoming those people who might push themselves a little bit more because they've just got a bit older? Or is there something else going on? Are they still those collaborators?
I think there's a lot of stuff that continues to shape a generation as they get older. We are also millennials will also be absorbing what is going on in the world and shifts in the focus on sustainability and authenticity in the workplace and things. So you continue to absorb that. So I think it's probably millennials would have been in the workplace for a little bit longer, built up the skills and the experience, and then absorbing the shifts in the world, and then are able to be much more confident in asking for what they want. But I think we definitely struggle with it a bit more than the new generations coming in.
And finally, just in one sentence, the best thing about being a boomer. The best thing about being. I'll start that one again. And finally, just one more thing. In one sentence, what do you think the best thing about being a millennial is, and what's the most challenging thing about being a millennial?
It's probably the same thing. I think the best thing is being in the middle and having mentors and people that you're inspired by, both the older generation and the younger ones. I mean, totally inspired by younger generations coming in and how passionate they are and won't settle for something, and then you're sort of guided a lot as well by the older generation. But then that will bring its own challenge as well, is where you're like, well, what's my role here now, and when do things really shift for me as a millennial, and how do I need to adapt when I'm actually still finding my way? I feel I'm 13 years into a career, and I think the retirement age might be 70. How am I going to have to adapt? As we millennials have so many more years to still in the workplace. So I think that will bring a lot of challenges in just adapting as we go, being sort of potentially the new bridges of the generations.
Kristine, it's been fantastic chatting. I found out so much more. I just love hearing perspectives of different generations than my own, and to hear your perspective, which is, of course, one voice amongst a multitude of millennial voices. But it's been absolutely great. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, and I hope you enjoyed it too.
I loved it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. It's been great. And people can find a little bit more about you in the show notes. In the meantime, thank you very much indeed for joining us as well. We'll be back again in 2 weeks' time with another podcast. Bye for now. The Alastair Greener Generationally Speaking podcast was presented by me, Alastair Greener. It was recorded at Granary Studios and produced by James Jones. Please follow us and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more, visit generationallyspeaking.co.uk.